Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, and sorry, just kind of dealing with some pop-ups as we go here. And we're, again, very, very happy to be doing this work here in the city of Detroit with a lot of great partners. And so today, this event is going to focus on lead, and specifically lead paint in our homes and the hazards that are posed by lead paint, and then also some of the strategies that some of our wonderful community partners are utilizing to try and address this problem of lead paint. And before we get too far down the road there, I want to introduce our Community Advisory Board co-chair. And Sandra Turner-Handy is the co-chair of our Community Advisory Board. Again, that's this group of leaders in our community that works with us as part of the Cures Center. And wanted to just ask Sandra to give a little bit of a kind of historical perspective about lead and lead abatement, kind of where we've been and where we're going. And so Sandra, if you could please just take it over and give us a little bit of that historical perspective, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick, and thank you everyone for that is joining us today. My entry into the world of lead paint in our homes and the impact that it has on our children occurred back in the year 2000. The Detroit Free Press did a series of events around lead paint in homes in the city of Detroit and the increasing number of children that was being impacted by lead. As a person working in the state house at the time in the legislature, we quickly moved to come up with some policies around lead-based paint in our homes. And one was to try to get universal testing, because we figured out that many of our children weren't getting tested for lead. That was a no-go. We had HMOs being implemented at the time, and because it would be just put into their program without any increased reimbursement, most of the HMOs were against that, or I should say managed care. So we came up with another avenue. We knew that many of these children were living in rented homes. So the idea was to get landlords to get inspections on their homes to make sure that they did not have lead-based paint in their homes if they were going to knowingly rent their homes to families with children under the age of 5. That passed. That bill literally passed, and Wayne County Prosecutor's Office picked it up, and we were literally prosecuting landlords that knowingly rented to families with children. That lasted for, I want to say, between 5 to 10 years, and the funding ran out on it. And within that time, a group of Wayne State professors and industry-led abatement educators in the industry, environmental groups, the state of Michigan, all got together and formed a partnership called the Detroit Lead Partnership. And that partnership has been advocating for policies and ordinances that would help to identify homes in Detroit that did have lead in it and work towards abatement of those homes. Wayne State University has been one of our leading advocates in this fight against lead and in the fight to come up with policies that would help us to reduce that exposure to our kids for a long time. So I am so pleased to join them in this great fight. One of the things that the Detroit Lead Partnership and others are a great part of is our Lead Advocacy Day. Every year we do lead education to our state legislators in order to make sure that we have the funding necessary to support the work around lead, to support abatement of lead, to support education around lead. We have residents that come from all over the state, and they join us in Lansing for a day of just educating. And that group of people include parents. You know, our parents are our front line grassroots advocates around, we need funding to make sure that we are taking care of our children. We're educating families around exposure to lead. Today, you're going to hear from some of our main organizations that have been fighting the issue of lead in the city of Detroit for as long as I've been in it, and probably prior to me even getting into that field. So, Nick, I don't know if I gave a great history on it, but one other thing, let me take a step back. I do want to say that these groups that you are going to hear from today have formed a lead working group with the city of Detroit. And they work very closely with our Building Safety Environmental Engineering Department, BC, on developing ordinances around rental property. And one of the ordinances that they were able to pass a few years ago was that every year or every time they go in to inspect rental property, lead would be one of the hazards that would be on the list. Since then, that law has changed, and they will update you on the change in that law, but we are still advocating and still working with the city to make sure that the city and others know that we have an older housing stock in the city of Detroit. And we have various zip codes in our city that have a high concentration of lead-based paint in it. We have generational homes in our city that, again, where we have children going to visit their grandparents or others in their family, and they're incurring lead in that home. As I said, Wayne State has been a great resource around data that implicates the areas where we have the most trouble with lead-based paint in the homes and the areas where there's generational homes. So I want to thank Wayne State, and along with the presenters that you're going to hear from today, in really explaining where we're at and what we need to do in order to decrease the number of children that are being impacted by this poison in our homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. That was a great overview, and thank you as well for your leadership and tireless advocacy on this issue. I know you're always shining the spotlight on other folks, but you've been a real champion here too, and so thank you for that. And now we're going to hear from Laprisha Daniels, who's Executive Director of Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice. And Laprisha is going to give us kind of an overview of lead policy and the practices in Detroit, and sort of kind of how these different programs are working and operating, and maybe some some gaps and some issues that we still need to focus on, so we make sure that we can keep our families safe. So with that, I'll kick it over to Laprisha. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Sandra, for giving that overview of lead in Detroit and what some of the challenges are. And so Sandra already mentioned that a lot of our housing stock has lead present. So 80% of the homes in Detroit are pre-1978, and those are the homes that we are most concerned about. We do know that with the Flint water crisis, there was a lot of light shed on issues where there may be lead in water, et cetera. But in Detroit, really, our lead issue is from our housing stock and from lead dust that is within our homes, that comes from lead paint that has been there for generations, as Sandra has said. And so that is our main concern. And so what does the city do to make sure that we can identify homes that have lead, and then what processes are in place and what practices do we have to protect our loved ones, our neighbors, ourselves? So Sandra mentioned rental properties. And so let's talk a little bit about that. We do in Detroit have a property maintenance code that requires that owners of rental properties built before 1978 have a lead inspection and risk assessment performed. And that's to determine whether there is lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards within the home. If there are lead-based hazards in the home, they have to be reduced or controlled using interim controls or abatement prior to a tenant occupying that space. After those controls are performed by properly trained and certified folks, so this is not something that can be done by the property owner unless they are certified and trained to do so, then that property owner is to obtain a clearance that there is, that the home is safe. Every property owner that is renting is supposed to have a clearance saying that a certificate of rental registration, saying that they are able to rent this home out to other folks. This is on the books, but is not necessarily enforced. And so as a renter, you knowing that your landlord is supposed to have the certificate of compliance gives you power. You can ask to see whether there is a certificate of compliance. If there is not, then we are not sure whether this home has been inspected and whether it's lead safe. And so it's really important that those that are renting, especially if you have children 6 and under who are most at risk for lead poisoning, that you are making sure that the home that you are renting has a certificate of compliance, because that means that there has been an inspection. That is part of that process of getting that certificate of compliance at this point in Detroit. If you find that there is no, you're already in the home, there is no certificate of compliance, there may not have been a lead inspection. If a property is rented out without the proper lead clearance, there are fines and penalties for non-compliance. And it depends on the size of the unit, but the minimum first offense fine is $500 for the property owner. That is not for the tenant. You are not responsible for making sure that there's a lead clearance. You are not responsible for making sure that house is lead safe. That is the responsibility of the property owner. And that is something that you can reach out to BSEED about. If that house does not have a certificate of compliance, you can reach out and have that scheduled to have an inspection done at your home. That does not have to be done by the homeowner. Rochelle, I'll get you the information so you can put it in the chat when I'm done speaking, so they know exactly who to reach out to. So that's one level of protection that folks have, and that's one policy that you can use to your benefit to make sure folks are safe inside your home. The other way that we talk about often that lead dust can get inside the home is from demolitions that are happening nearby. And so you can imagine if there is lead-based paint in 80% of our homes in Detroit, that as a house is being torn down, that structure is being disturbed at a level that dust will now fly throughout the neighborhood and then can get into homes. And so the city of Detroit does have a practice that they use and protocols that they use called the Detroit Demolition Protocol. And this borrows from national best practices and has been commended by the EPA actually for the use that it has had in Detroit. So this process is that, first of all, there should be notices to those nearby that there will be a demo in the community. So contractors are given door hangers in every household within 400 feet, which is about 8 houses, of a home that is going to be demoed, should get a door hanger so that they know that there's an increased risk. That's the first step that's supposed to happen. The next thing is following the protocols, which houses are sprayed with water before and during demolition to reduce dust. In addition, demolition debris is wetted as it's loaded up and hauled away. So this is a fairly simple practice that is supposed to be used during demos to make sure that communities are safe. Sandra, I see you giggling. So this is what's supposed to happen. And so if there's a demo happening in your community and this did not happen, the phone number to call is 1-844-DET-DEMO. And you can alert them so that they know that this is not happening. Oh my gosh, there's a demo happening. We never got door hangers. We did not know this was happening. Looks like they're not spraying it down. Then you call 1-844-DET-DEMO and you report it. And what will happen then is, I want to read this. Contractors caught violating Detroit Building Authority requirements are suspended or terminated from Detroit's demolition program. And so if community members are reporting that someone is not using the proper procedures, they will not be able to provide services in Detroit again. You are not allowed to continue to harm the health and well-being of our neighbors and friends, is how this works. And so I know Rochelle just put that, someone just put that number in the chat, but that is the number you call if you see that this is happening. There is another program that is in place. I mentioned that most of our concern is not about water, but you can have your water tested as well. If you think there's an issue, if you think that's a source of lead exposure, then you can have your water tested as well. And of course, most of us have heard about the replacement of water lines as well, which is supposed to help to reduce potential exposure to lead through water. And so the city really does have programs in place that are focused on making sure folks are safe in rental properties, making sure folks are safe during demos, and making sure our water is safe. The last thing I'll say is, Sandra, you mentioned universal testing. And so there is a bill right now in Lansing, Senate Bill 0031, that calls for universal testing for lead for children under 6. And so I will also, Rochelle, provide you the information. Mary Sue said that folks can email her if they want to continue to get updates about what's going on with that bill. But that bill would require testing for every child under 6. Right now, that is not a requirement in the state of Michigan. And it will serve us well to have every child tested so that we know what their risks are, whether there's exposure coming from somewhere. Sometimes, as Sandra said, it could be from the grandmother's house. Sometimes it's from the daycare, especially home daycare. And so knowing that children are being exposed and then being able to put the right processes in place to make sure children are getting the support that they need and households and families are getting the support that they need. So with that, I am going to turn it back over to Nick. I know there were things popping up in the chat. There may have been questions for me. I believe we're going to take questions toward the end. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Nick. And he's a lawyer. So
yeah. Thanks. No, thanks, Laprisha. And I do, just before I let you mute for just one quick question. So we did have a question about reducing or removing lead. And I think the question is, what does reducing mean? Can you talk a little bit? So, I mean, is there a way to, I guess it would be to, eliminate lead from certain areas like, window frames, or is that what you meant? If you could maybe just clarify that real quick before we.
Yeah, yes. So in terms of, I have to make sure I have the right hat on, right? So I used to be at the Detroit Health Department and the lead program rolled up to me. So there are lots of ways to reduce lead exposure in the home, but specifically, in terms of the ordinance, hazards must be reduced or controlled using interim controls. It's saying getting it to a level where the house is considered lead safe. And so that's what they mean by reduced or controlled. So there could be multiple ways that that's done. So it could mean that there is replacement of windows, obviously, that would help. And it could be, full lead abatement of the house. But it just has to be reduced to a stage that it is considered lead safe, not lead free, but lead safe.
Thanks, Laprisha. That's helpful. And yeah, on that point too. So if you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation today. But if you're thinking of something and you want, just go ahead and throw it in the chat, and we'll do our best to kind of address them as we go, or make sure to answer them at the end of the meeting. And like I said, we will have a Q&A, but if things occur to you, just go ahead and drop them in the chat. That's totally fine. So today's event, we have these educational sessions, and we also try and talk about some potential advocacy strategies, so that if you're concerned either about lead in your own home or in your community, perhaps your community doesn't have a program like Detroit's lead abatement program. How could you go about setting something like that up in your own community? So I wanted to talk just a few minutes about some of the challenges and why it's taken so long. I mean, as Sandra and Laprisha have both said, I mean, it's not like this is a new issue. It's not like something that we haven't known for a long time that lead is harmful. There's no safe level of lead, and so why is it that many years later we've banned lead paint for decades, over 50 years? Why are we still dealing with this issue? And that gets to this question of enforcement, and ultimately who's on the hook to pay for either remediating homes or doing a full abatement of homes. So I want to talk a little bit about some potential strategies that you may be able to employ, either in Detroit to make sure that this program continues to grow and to provide relief to families who are living in homes with lead, but also perhaps how other communities might adopt a similar program and may advocate for resources to come into their communities to remove lead. Because again, there's no safe level of lead. Ideally, we don't have any of it present in our homes, but there are some interim steps that can be taken to at least make sure that it's safe and contained, and that we can limit to the greatest extent possible the exposure to children. So thinking about a little bit about what Sandra said about the history of Detroit's program, and if you're in a community that is outside of Detroit, how would you go about perhaps setting up a partnership or a program that would fund the remediation of lead in homes? And as I alluded to just a moment ago, primarily this does come down to money and to who ultimately is responsible for removing the lead from the home. Now, prior to Detroit making the changes to the ordinance that now requires landlords to have this certificate of compliance, prior to that, what was required under state law was basically just a landlord, if your home was built before 1978 in the city of Detroit, or around that same time in other communities, they would have an ordinance that would say that a landlord had to just provide information about lead. So you would see oftentimes when people would sign a lease, they would get a little packet of information about the dangers of lead, and like, just be aware that lead may be present in your home. But there wasn't a requirement to actually make that home lead safe, right? It was more just like a disclosure type of a requirement. So, one thing to look at would be, what are the ordinances within your home community? What exactly do they say about lead? What do they require of landowners or sellers, people that are selling homes? So this is really interesting too, as far as disclosures, right? And you get some pushback from groups that are very powerful lobbyists, like realtors, who they don't want to have any sort of impediment in the transfer of sales of property. But homeowners, we're transferring homes. I mean, it sure would be nice if there was a certification that homes were lead safe before there's a sale. But primarily, we're very concerned about the landlord tenant issue, because often people are renting from landlords in dwellings that are not lead safe. So that's one thing to look and see. What does your local ordinance say within your community about lead? What assurances or certifications do landlords have to make, if any? And then also, question about the sale of properties too. What can we do there to make it, not just about a landlord tenant issue, which again is very, very critical and important, but also when we're selling homes, that's an advocacy opportunity there when we're talking to our local elected officials and state elected officials. Now, the other piece too is, as I mentioned, is funding. And so, one of the ways that Detroit was able to ramp up this program is through money, federal funds, as well as state funds that are made available to help support this work. And I know we'll hear a little bit more about that from Diane in a few moments, so I'm not going to talk a lot about that aspect, but I do want to just make you all aware that it is not necessarily cheap. I mean, this can cost many thousands of dollars to do a full home lead abatement. And so advocating with your municipality, having them apply for, seek grants, funds from state and federal government to actually do this work is critically important, because without that, I mean, it's certainly difficult for individuals, for families to be able to come up with that amount of money to do the full lead abatement work. But there may be some funds available, and those funds are often restricted to municipalities, right? So they can't go, you know, as an individual, I might not be able to apply to the state of Michigan for some funding. I might have to go through a municipality or through a nonprofit organization, which again, Diane will talk about in just a second. And so if you're in a community that isn't Detroit and you're thinking about scaling up one of these programs, you know, it's important to talk to your city council members or your township board, whoever it is. Find out, you know, what the ordinance says within your, because in Michigan we have something called home rule. That means that our cities, townships, villages, they have a lot of leniency under state law to kind of set their own ordinances. And so as long as they don't conflict with a state or federal law, these ordinances can kind of be all over the map. And so that's one thing to look at is, you know, what does it say about lead? What does it say about landlords, if anything? Do they have this type of certificate program to make sure that these homes are safe for occupancy? And if not, that's certainly something to advocate for. And those changes to ordinances, they can be done at the local level. You know, you get a majority vote on your township board or on your city council, and they can make changes to those ordinances. And so that's a really good way to advocate within your communities. And again, if you don't have one of these programs in your community, advocating that they apply for, seek funding from the state and federal government to do this important remediation work. Okay, then I want to talk a little bit about Detroit. And Laprisha and Sandra both mentioned how important it is to remain vigilant in terms of inspections and making sure that the city, you know, BC Building Safety Environment Engineering Department that handles inspections of properties that are leased from landlords, you know, making sure that they actually carry out those inspections, you know, making sure that if you're renting, you know, asking for that certificate of compliance to see that the home is safe for you to occupy it. If not, you know, make sure that work gets done before you sign that lease, you know, and report that landlord. I've actually seen this come up in disputes over late payments for rent or people that are facing eviction. If these properties do not have a certificate of compliance, you know, that the landlord should be fixing that, and they should not be able to evict people until they come into compliance. And so that's something that we're seeing more in, you know, in that context of people that are, you know, perhaps forced losing their home. So that, again, that's another area where we can, you know, try and check and make sure that landlords are following the law and that they're making these homes safe for occupancy by remediating or reducing the amount of lead in the home. So, you know, that means being in close communication with members of city council, making sure that they are on top of BC, the city department that's in charge of doing these inspections, you know, making sure that this isn't something that just sort of isn't at the top of the list, right? Like, we want to make sure that there's constant attention here. And then the demolition piece. This has gotten a lot of media attention over the past several years, where there have been some contractors that have not been following all those regulations that Laprisha mentioned. You know, they were, you know, coming in sometimes, you know, clearing multiple homes on a block without doing any of the water suppression to keep the dust down, not making sure that the lead was appropriately handled and landfilled at a facility that's meant to accept lead. And so this got a lot of attention. There was several contractors that were some, you know, really just bad operators, people that should not be licensed to do work in the state. So fortunately, the city has made a lot of progress in no longer working with those folks and making sure that people that have those types of violations on their record do not continue to get contracts with the city to do the demolition work. But as Laprisha said, I mean, you really do have to be eyes and ears, because, you know, oftentimes there might be a property that's slated for demolition and it's been an approved demolition, but then maybe some months go by between, you know, when that was approved for demolition, when the work actually happens. And, you know, stuff happens, right? Where sometimes the people that are actually doing the work are not, they're not following the law, they're not following that demolition protocol. And that's why it's important to call that number if you see that, because again, we don't have enough inspectors to be on every block, every hour of every day. And so we really do need to be informed citizens and to make that phone call when, you know, even if you have a question, right? Like, you see the work going on and it's like, you know, I don't know, have they done lead remediation? Have they done asbestos remediation? I mean, these are things that you can ask to make sure that you're safe and that your neighborhood's safe. Because one thing I don't know that we've mentioned yet, but I did want to point out that another danger with demolition is the lead getting in the soil. So we do have lead contamination from industrial activity, from steel mills and other large industrial facilities that are emitting lead into the air as pollutants, and then that settles in the soil and accumulates over time. But we also see lead entering the soil from demolition, right? So if paint isn't properly remediated and you're pulling down a house and the cracking paint comes off the boards and gets into the soil, that's off a pathway for exposure as well. Kids out playing as they should be, running around in the yard having a good time. If they come into contact with lead in soil, lick their fingers, whatever, that can be an exposure pathway as well. And it's also a good time to remind folks too that if you're doing gardening, which we always encourage you to do, get that soil tested as well, because there can be contaminants, things like lead, that are present in your soil, which could potentially be harmful to you. So even better, use the raised beds with some good compost. But just to note that soil is another potential exposure pathway from lead, and that's why we want to make sure that these demolitions are done in an appropriate way, or that can again lead to potential harm from exposure. Okay, I'm about to wrap up here, but I just wanted to say that there's one other potential thing that I would like folks to consider from an advocacy perspective, and that is enforcement at the state level. So our state attorney general, their office, they have some additional tools in their legal toolbox to go after, in particular, landlords that are not following the law, that are continuing to rent homes that pose a danger from lead exposure. And Attorney General Dana Nessel, she's joined with I think 18 other states to try and push the Environmental Protection Agency to have more enforcement opportunities available when it comes to lead exposure. But one of the things I think we need to do is to see some more aggressive enforcement actions brought by the state. And I just mentioned that the state attorney general, they've actually got a little comment section on their website. And so, just noting that this is something that we as a community are concerned about, that we want to make sure that landlords that are continuing to rent properties that are not lead safe, that they're held accountable. And again, there's some additional enforcement tools at the state level that the city of Detroit doesn't necessarily have through their ordinance enforcement. But particularly people that are violating the law, I mean, they should be held accountable. And so that's something where, again, if our elected officials, if they're not hearing from us about this issue, they can sometimes go down the list, right? And they're focused on other things. And so it's just important to note that that's another potential pathway there for advocacy. Okay, so with that, and again, I see there's some questions. We'll make sure we address those in a second. But before we get too far off schedule, I now want to introduce our next speaker. We've got another wonderful expert joining us today, Diane McCloskey, who's Executive Director of ClearCorps Detroit. And Diane's going to talk a little bit about, again, some of these policies and practices that are ongoing, including the Get the Lead Out Detroit Coalition and the resources that are available to homeowners. So Diane, I'll kick it over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, ClearCorps Detroit has been around for a little over 20 years and been working with many of the people on this call to really try to prevent lead poisoning in kids. Lead poisoning is 100% preventable, and we work with a variety of partners, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But to follow up on Nick and Laprisha, I did want to mention that if you text your home address, and I'll put this in the chat unless someone else does, to 313-254-DEMO, you will get notified by text when there is a demolition in your neighborhood. We work in a building on the Far East Side here that contains a Head Start organization. And 2 houses were in bad need of being torn down for the last 3 years. And over the last 6 months, they tore them down one at a time. And neither time was Head Start notified, and we are literally across the street from it, as well as with a playground. So you do have to be diligent. They do put signs out front, and it was just crazy trying to cover the playground equipment and everything else, because there are things you can do if it's happening in your yard You want to cover things or wash them down that kids are doing on. So I do encourage you to enter that in, because anytime that it's happening, even if you don't get notified by the tag on the door, you will be notified. Also, on the Detroit rental registration, there is another resource where you can put in your address and check to see if your property, rental property, is registered. And I can put that in the chat as well, unless someone else would like to do that. And that is detroitmi.gov/webapp, WEBAPP/rental-map. Again, that's detroitmi.gov/webapp/rental-map. You can put in your address and see. It will show you two different things. It will show you if your landlord has started the process, which is considered registered, and then it'll show you if they have completed the process, which would be compliance. To get from point A to point B, they have to have the lead investigation risk assessment clearance, and they have to have a third-party outside inspector come into the home for health and safety and other types of things. So, the city's website does have your rights and such as a citizen, but that's an easy way if you're timid and don't want to come right out and ask the landlord, or if there's a rental property next door to you or across the street from you, you can check on it that way. You can also report to the city, not at that particular website link, if there is someone in your neighborhood that's a rental home that you've already found on the map that isn't. I can't guarantee what the enforcement will be, but we have been told that you can now report them. So just wanted to share those couple of resources. Over the past year, I've been working with 14 different organizations to form the Get the Lead Out Detroit Coalition. And our mission really is to work together to try to do things that none of us can do on our own. There's a lot of great people working at a lot of great tables on things, but there's still some things that fall between the cracks. So we're just getting ready to launch the website. And this weekend, we do have a Lead Safe Kids Resource Fair. I'm going to put the flyer in the chat. And at that, it's going to be on February 11th from 10 to noon at the Ford Resource and Engagement Center at the Mercado in Southwest Detroit. And basically, we want families and their kids to come out. You're going to learn about the lead hazards. There will be testing by the Wayne Mobile Health Unit to do lead testing right there on site. The city of Detroit's going to be there taking lead hazard reduction grant applications and information. Well, be information on the Michigan Saves Lead Poisoning Prevention Fund, Lakeshore Legal Aid. The health department will be doing some education sessions and also cleaning demonstrations and giving away free cleaning kits. The D-Lead Parent Group, which is a parent support group sponsored at Wayne State, will be there to talk to parents who've had kids impacted by lead. Molina Healthcare will be there, and the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services Childhood Lead Poisoning Prevention Program will be there with some information as well. A lot of us, do things separately. We've joined together to design this, the first of our event, to see how we can leverage resources and such to really try to reach families, hopefully before their kids are lead poisoned, but also because we know testing numbers are low in the city and throughout the state. We want to try to figure out ways to have more opportunities to make it easy for folks to get their kids tested for free. There will also be COVID and flu vaccinations there as well. I'm going to also invite you, if you would like, right now the coalition is just forming, but the idea is that over the next couple months, we will have an advocacy group you can sign up for. You can sign up just for newsletters if you want to be more engaged in education or medical or just outreach in your community. Our goal is to link you with resources of either things that we're doing or other organizations like MyELSH, the Michigan Alliance for Lead Safe Housing, or the Ecology Center, I know who's on the call today, or the D-Lead Parent Group, or others who are doing things. We want to be a linkage to others so that if you're thinking about lead, you will come to the website, which will be launching, will be a soft launch next week, but it'll be formal about the beginning of March. So that you can find connections to people and things who are interested. You can find speakers to speak to your block club group. We can promote each other's events and such. So for right now, if you're interested in learning more about that, our email is detroitledcoalition@gmail.com. That's detroitledcoalition@gmail.com. And I am going to share the flyer for the event, if I did this right, in the chat. Looks like it went there. Or if you have any questions about the event itself, you can also reach us through that email. And that is it for me. We're just really excited. We want to build up a mailing list and a contact list and just really lift up our partners and try to identify the work that we're doing together. I will say there's several people on this call who've been a big part of starting to get our priorities together. And I thank all of you and the community for, helping us to inform this work. So we may know the medical or the, scientific end of things, or a little bit of the housing and stuff. We're trying to marry health, housing, environmental, social justice together to truly make a greater impact. So with that, I will close.
Thanks, Diane. That was wonderful, and appreciate all the resources as well. Folks, there's a lot of stuff that's been put in the chat, so you'll want to check and see those available resources. We'll also make those available after the event concludes. And Rochelle, we may do a post event email. We often will do that, where we also encourage folks to fill out a survey, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. But before we do that, we do want to make sure that we answer any additional questions. And I first just wanted to ask Sandra, Laprisha, Diane, anything that that we missed that we should make sure to cover through the presentations before we kick it over for questions, or anything else additional to add, I should say, too. Good.
I just wanted to do a quick update. Laprisha talked about the demo and the best practices. I do want to state, because I just felt that we were so honored that Wayne State, one of Wayne State professors, was actually a part of coming up with the best practices around the demolitions here in the city of Detroit. So I just want people to understand that Wayne State, and I guess I just keep uplifting Wayne State because I'm an alumni, right? Okay. But Wayne State has been so instrumental in keeping the fact that we need lead policies and practices here in Detroit, and providing the research data, and then along with ClearCorps bringing in families to tell the story, so that when we're advocating around dollars to help us to fight lead in the city of Detroit and across the state of Michigan, we have all of the necessary data and stories that we need in order to talk to legislators and push them to understand that lead is not regulated to just certain parts of our state. Lead is in homes throughout our whole state, meaning that every legislator's constituency may be impacted. And that's the story that a lot of the people on this call, our lead advocates, are taking to Lansing and taking to our local governments in order to push ordinances.
Absolutely, thank you. And yeah, it's so important. Like we talked about a little while ago. I mean, some of these fixes, they're not hard to do from a policy perspective, right? Some of this is just adding a sentence or two into your ordinance about rental properties in a community. But the political will to do that is a different thing, because again, these things do come at a cost, and so it's often if we're not advocating and pushing our elected officials and representatives to make these changes, they often won't, because they're only hearing from the person that owns 15 rental properties in the community, and they're there at the at the meeting, at the zoning board and at the city council meeting every week, making sure that their voice is heard. So we have to do the same, and thank you for that, Sandra. Okay, so at this point, we'll go ahead and open it up. If there are other questions, I know we've had a few in the chat, which we've kind of been answering as we go, but happy to open it up, and we've got some wonderful experts here to address any questions or comments that folks may have. If you could either just raise your hand or unmute yourself, I'll do my best to call on you. And if we every now and then, you knock it out of the park and you answer the questions throughout the presentation, and that's totally fine too. So Rochelle, do we have a link for the evaluation? Could we perhaps get that up in the chat? So we do, we take these presentations and we're happy to share them elsewhere. Rochelle, who I didn't introduce at the beginning of the call, but so she's the one who's been communicating with you all prior to the call. Rochelle Chapman is our awesome coordinator for community engagement with the Cure Center. So there's a link there in the chat. We'd love it if you could go in and just answer that quick survey. It helps us out. We do like to track, like this event, right? Did we hit the mark? Are there things that we could have included or that would have been more helpful and beneficial? That allows us to be more responsive and to provide events that are meaningful and valuable, because we understand how busy you all are, and we appreciate you being here. So those really, we do evaluate those, and we evaluate ourselves, and we try and consistently improve our programming. And I also did want to mention that we are able to share this information in smaller groups, and so Rochelle, either through video presentations or sharing resources, if you have organizations that you would benefit and that would be welcome to having this type of information, please go ahead and contact Rochelle, and she can help facilitate that in connecting members of our community advisory board and the Cure Center to help participate in those learning opportunities as well. Rochelle, did I get that right? Anything you need to add on that? Okay, good. Yeah, and Rochelle's got her email there in the chat as well. Well, I'm willing to, we can kind of keep hanging out if folks have any additional questions that want to ask after the meeting. But let me just do another quick check. Yeah, seeing no additional questions or comments in the chat, I think we can go ahead and wrap it. And thank you all for your time and attention today. I really want to thank our speakers, Sandra Turner-Handy, Laprisha Daniels, and Diane McCloskey, for your expertise and for being just really powerful and tireless advocates on such an important issue. I see Like Thompson was on the call too. I think you got some shout outs related to your work, but thank you so much for all the excellent work you've done on trying to make our community safer and by getting rid of lead. And so just thanks for that. There's hi Like. Thanks again for being here too, and again for all the awesome work you've done over the years. So okay, with that, we'll thank you all very much for your attendance today, and we'll see you again soon.